How's it going? And welcome to episode 205 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I am Adam Howe, joined as always by my co-host Kevin Hastings. And Kevin, we're getting right into it because we have way too much to talk about. And you reminded me last week, this is our final non-fab really like specific episode. That's crazy.
It is. It really is. I've been thinking about this a lot as I had a couple of drafts going. My TGFBI finished up today as
Oh,
we
lucky.
record here on Friday, and I'm like, am I jumping in a couple more? I'm like, well, I'm only a week away, really.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know what to do. But at some point over the weekend, I'll probably jump in something, I'm sure. But yeah, we're close. It's time to start taking that into consideration, and it's exciting. You don't take a whole lot out of spring training. There are things we look for as a Royals fan. Jack Caglianone just crushing baseballs with what appears to be an effortless,
Right.
smooth swing is so much fun. You as a Red Sox fan, three of the top prospects in baseball hitting a home run in the same game. That was so cool. Juan Soto hitting the guy that with a home run that had been heckling him in the outfield. I don't know if you saw that. I mean, it's just been so much fun. While there's a few things we try to take out of spring training performances and playing time mostly, but for the most part, it's just fun. And when this episode airs, we will be 2 days away from Major League Baseball that counts for the 2025 season.
Yeah, that's also insane. Just the fact, and then we go right back to more spring training games. But yeah, I mean, that's what spring training is supposed to be about, right? It's supposed to be fun. Like,
Yeah, they're exhibition games.
yeah, they don't count. I mean, they count for a lot of players. Like, a lot of players have to take it extremely seriously because they're fighting for their jobs, or at least
Right.
they're on a spot, like they're on a pedestal and they're playing in a spotlight so that they can, make a name for themselves in the future. We'll talk about a couple of those, of course, as well. But like, in the 2006 season, if anybody's not aware, I worked for the Toronto Blue Jays down in Dunedin, Florida, and the spring training vibe was very different than the high A ball regular season vibe. I mean, there were more people in the stands.
Of course.
Not that many more. This is in Dunedin, Florida. The Florida spring training, for those who haven't been to both. I've only been to Arizona for spring training once, and it was also in like the early aughts. And then 2006, obviously spent a lot of time down there as well in the same amount of time. But it was a very different feeling, very different aura. Like, just the crowds were huge in Arizona, whereas the only games that sold out in that season for us were the games against the Red Sox and the Yankees. And so it was very different, but just the feeling though around it was a lot more ooh and ah, because these are major league players playing down there, when the fans down in that general area are just used to use the high A ball players. And it was just fun. And most of the players, the major league players, were just having a blast doing whatever that they needed to be doing, and they were being way more fan interactive than I think a lot of players are during the regular season. And it's just a good time. Enjoy it. Let's just enjoy it. It's baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. It was almost 30 years ago. The Royals used to do spring training in Florida, Baseball City. And so I did get to attend there, and it was an absolute blast. And I've never attended a spring training game in Arizona, but I've been to the spring training parks because of going to First Pitch
Sure.
Arizona and Arizona Fall League games. So I completely understand uh, the I do understand what we often see as, a big difference is the travel between the
Oh,
ballparks.
that's the
The
biggest factor.
huge difference
Yeah,
between the two. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're playing on two different coasts in Florida.
Yeah,
Never
exactly.
never mind, Arizona is like everything's right there. Like everything's within
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
We complain for a 45-minute drive during first pitch Arizona. That's the furthest we ever have to go.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, like I said, we got a lot to cover, even though we didn't take the week off this time, Kevin. Still plenty of news that
So
comes
much news.
through. Some, well, I'm just going to say mostly bad because it's spring training and we get demotions and we get injuries and it's just what happens. So let's get right into one of said injuries. Grayson Rodriguez, he received a cortisone shot for his right elbow inflammation. That means he's going to be shut down for at least 7 to 10 days from throwing. It doesn't mean he'll be ready to go in 7 to 10 days, obviously. So, I mean, I've seen Grayson Rodriguez drop quite a bit in ADP in the drafts that I am not as lucky. My TGFBI draft is still going. I think we're in round 22. I'm not gonna lie, I am one of the problems. I have let my clock go down. Jake, if you're listening, thank you for the reminders. Every once in a while, he shoots me over a text. Yeah, so I saw him drop quite a bit there. I dropped into one of the Plazo draft champion style drafts as well. I think he's still on the board there. And then my Raslam is still going on as well. I'm pretty sure he got picked up by now and there, but still, what's your overall take on Grayson Rodriguez? Are you just, staying away from him completely, or how far does he have to fall?
Well, I read today that he's set to start his throwing progression. That's great news. I didn't see exactly what day that was, but evidently soon he's going to start that. So that's great news. And I think those that I have main event ADP pulled up. There's been 4 main event drafts so far that are included in ADP. His min pick is 259. There that may have been a very, very short window where people can
Sure.
get some handsome rewards there, because with this news that now he's starting his throwing progression, he's going to start bumping back up. And if it's all good news, and he's going to skyrocket back to where he was around pick 100. So I think I don't have any Grayson Rodriguez, and it's because I say this a lot. It's about the types of players I draft, where he's being drafted. I don't have anything against Grayson Rodriguez. Didn't pre-injury. So yeah, I would have been ecstatic probably to grab him. The max pick was 300. If you could have grabbed Grayson Rodriguez at 300, and he's going to start ramping up here in a few days, and we see him end of April, early May, that's going to be a bargain.
Yeah, fair enough. I love that there are obviously already main event drafts that we can pull from, because we all know the ADP on those is completely ignores all the rest of the ADP that we might be quoting. So it's just a very different sample size or sample
Right.
set.
It's very recent. They're
Yeah.
reacting to all the recent news. It gets a little difficult. We have that little period when people are transitioning from draft and hold leagues to
Mhm.
fab leagues, where which ADP do I look at? I'm in a 15-team fab league. Do I look at 15-team draft and hold, or
Sure.
do I look at 12-team online championship, because that's a fab league? We don't have to make that decision anymore. Now we have main event ADP.
Yeah. I mean, for those of us in the drafts, we can go back and look at Earth drafts
Yeah,
ADP
yeah,
as well.
that
So
helps
that's
too.
nice as a 15 team starting point. All right, there was a whole bunch of, what, let's cross these two off first. False alarms, I guess I'll call them.
Yeah.
We got a couple of players who had negative x-rays or negative fractures after getting a little scary situations out on the field during spring training. Bobby Witt Jr., who received negative x-rays on his forearm, while Austin Riley said it was said that he did not fracture his hand after being hit in the hand the other day. He did not even have to travel to Atlanta for extra extra imaging. Though, I mean, that's great. These are all great news. But that also leads us to the one that did not come back so positively. And that is Francisco Alvarez. He's gonna miss 6 to 8 weeks with a fractured left hand. And I'm going to lump in another catcher injury here as well, Kevin, before you get into any kind of analysis. Tyler Stevenson, who I know you've been talking about positively most of the offseason, he's going to start the season on the IL with the dreaded oblique strain. Let's add insult to injury here for the Cincinnati Reds. Their backup catcher, Jose Trevino, who they just signed this offseason, he left Friday's spring training game after getting hit in the hand himself. Now, I don't have an update on what that looks like for Trevino's hand, but with all of that in mind, I mean, there's just a lot of people getting hit in the hand or the forearm or wherever. You got to be happy.
And still with the obliques that we've been dealing with. Yeah. This is crazy. Big sigh of relief with both Witt and Riley. I think that's all we have to say there. I posted, I don't think it was on Blue Sky. I think it was in the Discord. I was like, if Witt's forearm is broke, I'm canceling the 2025 MLB season. But luckily he's fine. Probably miss another day or two, be back in there. Riley, same way. Alvarez was not as lucky. We're going to be without him for a couple of months. It sounds like Stevenson is worrisome for me. As you said, I've talked about him quite a bit, and he's my favorite C2, my favorite, because he was moving up a little bit over the past couple of weeks, but I could typically still get him in a spot I was comfortable as my C2. It sounds like it's a minor oblique, but as we talk, every time we talk about anybody with an oblique, we just have no idea. Yeah. So I'm holding my breath on the Tyler Stevenson. That's probably the biggest one for me here. It's been rough, and for the most part, most of my teams have been fairly safe. The Tyler Stevenson news today was the biggest gut punch I've taken so far.
I definitely
I have him on 50% of my teams.
No, there we go. The Alvarez one hit at the perfect time for me because I still hadn't had my second catcher at one point, and I was highly considering grabbing him at that point. And then luckily that news kind of broke there, and I was able to avoid that landmine and got to pivot in a different direction. But the Stevenson, very similarly, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I ended up somebody else grabbed him, and I didn't end up I didn't get the opportunity to hit the landmine in my most recent opportunity. But what are we looking at in Cincinnati? Like, I mean, for the Mets as well, is there an alternative that we can or should be considering at the catcher position for either one of these teams?
I don't think so. And it's only been a few hours, right? Because this injury occurred on Friday, correct? I think it was Friday's game
for Alvarez.
Oh, no, for Stevenson.
Stevenson, when he was announced to be starting the IL, it was either Friday morning or Thursday afternoon. Trevino's injury happened during Friday's game. So yes, as we're recording this, the same day we're recording this.
Right. So that's what I'm looking at. So we're not going to see a lot of reaction like on roster resource yet. But even looking at that, right? Austin Wynn's non-roster invitee is their top catcher right now. Mm-hmm. He was listed as the backup behind Trevino. So the Stevenson injury was a day or two ago. I'm losing track of time on all these players. What's going on? And then if you go look at their minor league system, they have a couple of others non-roster invitees in camp. One projected, Michael Trotwine, projected to start in AAA. Will Banfield, projected to start at AA. Kind of like when we were talking about Atlanta last week. If it's bad news with Stevenson, and even if it's not, depending on what's up with Trevino, I see him going out and getting one of the veterans that's still available.
Yeah, I agree completely. None of their prospects that you're just looking at are on the 40-man roster either.
Right.
Same thing can be true about can be said about the Mets. They're pretty much just stuck with Luis Torrens as their starting catcher, with their only other catcher in
Which
camp.
one's going to sign Grandal? That's the only question, right?
Man, there's always an opportunity for a catcher late in spring training. There always seems to be something that pops up. And somebody will get DFA'd, and then we'll have more opportunities. So there'll be something that pops up. All right, let's move on off of the catcher position and head into the outfield for Atlanta. Jurickson Profar, he was diagnosed with a bone bruise, but more on the good news in his wrist, excuse me. But he's still expected to be ready for opening day. That is obviously good news for not only for those who drafted him, but for the Atlanta outfield in general, because they are still expected not to have Ronald Acuna Jr. Not in the lineup until mid-May. So, what's your overall take on the Atlanta lineup situation with both of these injuries / both good news in their own way coming across the desk?
Yeah, with Profar, I don't know if you saw the dive. It was scary looking. I wasn't so sure that we were going to see Profar for the first half of the season. Sounds like everything luckily worked out, and I still think Profar's being underdrafted. He's the leadoff hitter for Atlanta, right? And he's ready for opening day.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And I don't have nearly enough shares. So I am part of the problem with him being underdrafted. Must be another one of those situations where I'm looking at other categories and or positions in that area of the draft, because I love Jurickson Profar. But yeah, I think I think they're going to be okay there. Um, it's I forget what the other question was. I'm sorry, Adam.
Well, it was just I just lumped in the fact that Acuna won't be in the
Oh yeah,
lineup
Acuna.
until mid-May, so he's going to be missing the first month and a half of the season as well.
I think that yeah. I should have known that's exactly what we were talking about. I feel like people that have already drafted Acuna are taking that as bad news.
I mean, he's still
I
going.
mean,
He's still
I
going in like
know
the
at
third
points in
round.
the off
Yeah.
season we were told that it could be, early June. But then with like Strider, they backed off. News with Acuna had sounded pretty fairly positive throughout the offseason. Well, not horrible anyway. And now when it's one of those things again, we're already being told mid-May. So I'm not counting on mid-May.
Mid-May.
It makes this really tough. I want to see where Acuna is going in these main events over the last couple weeks.
I mean, we're going to be talking
Or last couple of days, actually. So big discrepancy here for somebody going as early as he is. ADP of 37 in 4 main events so far. Men though of 22 and max of 44. That's a wide spread at that early of an ADP. So wide variance in opinions on what the value will be there. I think if I'm going to draft Ronald Acuna, I have to think that getting him at the end of May / June 1st is valuable enough for me in that spot. That's what I would be basing it on. And the fact he flat out said he's going to run less. Now, when you're running less than last time we saw you healthy, you stole 70 bases. We don't know what that means, but other podcasts I've heard them have the same conversation, and they'll ask each other and set an over under at about 20 on stolen bases. And most analysts are taking the under on that. And I tend to agree. So I'm pretty much out on Acuna at this point.
You have
Unfortunately, it
sometimes
sucks.
you have to take the player at face value. You have to take his word for what it's worth. And sometimes also 2 injuries to the same, body part will, change the tune. So whether you come out the first time
And
saying, I'm not going to run
when
less
what
until hit 70, doesn't mean that it means the same thing after the second surgery.
and what they're saying is what we don't want to hear, we're much less likely
Yeah.
to believe them, and that's when we should.
Right. As exactly. We're going to talk about this a lot throughout the show, but I mean, the opportunity early on in the season, when now we know Acuna is going to be out for the first month and a half of the season, if not longer. Does this help you buy a little bit more into the Jarek Kelenic show, where he's the stronger side of the platoon, more regular playing time because there's the opportunity and the necessity of having somebody in the outfield that much, or is it still too much of a I don't trust Kelnick to do anything?
He's worth keeping an eye on. I'm not drafting him, but we'll keep an eye on this, of course. I mean, it's such a high prospect, a high pedigree prospect. We're going to keep our eyes on him, but yeah, he's almost 26 years old now. We've been seeing this for a while,
Mhm.
so yeah, definitely worth keeping an eye on. Joe Adell, we're still keeping an eye on. JP Crawford's a good example of why you keep an eye on him, because when JP Crawford first started producing in Seattle, it was quite a while before many people caught on to how good he
Or
was
believed it?
actually
Yeah, yeah.
producing. So it's to the point now where I think most people have forgotten about Kelnick. So you definitely want to keep an eye on him, because if it could just take one little adjustment.
Fair enough. All right, still lots of news to go. So we're going to get to all of that, but first we're going to take a quick break. All right, so now let's go over to the pitching side. Kevin, over in Los Angeles, Dave Roberts made a quote saying that Dustin May, quote, makes a lot of sense as the 5th starter for the Dodgers. And if I'm not mistaken, he also said at one point during the offseason that they don't plan on going with a 6-man rotation as well. So do we see a full 5-man rotation with May closing it out here with Los Angeles? And if Dustin May is the 5th starter, how much trust are you putting him in to actually keep that job?
Uh,
Because it is the
it's
Dodgers.
it's the difference, right? This is one of those cases where what we see looks so much better than the results we've gotten. He just looks nasty when he's on the mound. Doesn't look like anybody could touch a pitch he throws, but the strikeouts aren't there. Uh, I think I think he is definitely in the rotation and can keep the spot as long as he performs. Because even as the Dodgers start to get guys back, they're going to lose others too. We
Mhm.
just know this with this rotation. I also think it's interesting. It may be a while. It's starting to creep, and I've started to hear a little rumbling. Is Otani going to pitch again? Right? The Dodgers still say he is. They're still
Of
working
course,
towards
you gotta
that.
say that.
But the longer this goes and the more this happens, and now we're probably not going to see him pitching until at least the end of May. Well, Dustin May will be there at least until then. And then when you have Otani and you have Yamamoto and you have Sasaki, these guys want to pitch every 6th day. That doesn't mean 6th man rotation, but when they have full weeks, it does mean they will need that 6th starter. I think May is safe as long as he can perform.
Yeah, of course, Dodgers will always Dodger, right? There will always be
Yep.
Dodgeritis that we have to consider, not only because of injuries, but because of those pitchers you just mentioned wanting to pitch every 6th day or needing to just, to acclimate
Mhm.
themselves a little bit more. Um, but injuries also will loom. And I guess I wonder if they'll still tap into the depth from their minor leagues. Obviously, you still have the likes of Landon Knack and Bobby Miller and guys that have had their experience down in the minors. But I feel like they've had more in the past. They've had more depth on the 40-man roster where they can make those changes. And I wonder if they're going to be doing more bullpen games than spot starts, especially early on in the season. And so that'll be something to keep an eye on if you need to get those extra innings out of those, because their bullpen is, nothing to shake a stick at. There's some names that, even though they're not going to get you any saves per se, they're still going to be very useful in that area. Where I think we're going to be talking about some of them throughout the first couple weeks of the season when we get to our ratios category each week.
Yeah, another one in the main events this week, which the Dustin May news was there for all of these. Range of 238 to 354 in 4 drafts, like 120 pick gap.
Yeah.
So I think that will continue. There's going to be wide varying opinions on Dustin May.
All right. Well, let's stick with pitchers for now. Brandon Woodruff, with his shoulder injury, coming back from that, he is set to make his Cactus League debut on Sunday. Still not expecting Woodruff to be on the opening day roster, or at least the active roster. Probably still going to be starting on the IL or extending spring training or what have you. But this is a sign these things are going in the right direction. He's saying all the right things. He looks good. How much trust are you putting into Woodruff, and how long do you think you'll have to stash him if you are drafting him?
Yeah. So Woodruff is very intriguing to me, and I've grabbed him in a couple of spots, and I've grabbed him at times when I wasn't so sure I wanted to, and then I've let him go at times when I was pretty sure I actually wanted him, just because I don't want too many shares. This
Sure.
could turn out very well for where we're drafting Brandon Woodruff right now. If he's going to pitch on Sunday, let's just even if he was just starting his build up now, he's about 4 weeks behind is all. So we would see him by the end of April. If we're going to see Brandon Woodruff by the end of April and it be the Brandon Woodruff that we've seen in the past, that's amazing at his draft cost. Unfortunately, I did a little bit of reading on this type of injury, and it doesn't it doesn't seem like we've ever really seen anybody come back to what they were before with what Brandon Woodruff has. That's the risk. So I am willing to take that risk at his cost in a spot or two, but I'm being careful not to do it in too many spots.
Yeah, I mean, when you are doing as many leagues as you typically do, Kevin, you have the luxury. So that
Right.
that
If
what
I'm
you're
in 1 or 2 leagues, I'm probably avoiding
avoiding
them.
them altogether. Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing as well.
Yeah.
I have not drafted Woodruff anywhere, and I'm doing a lot less leagues this year than I have in the past. And so I am not itching to make sure I have him somewhere just so I can say I did. But if I were playing in like the same amount of leagues as I did last year, I'd have some exposure for sure. All right, we'll move back into the diamond here as the Dodgers. We'll go back to the Dodgers. They did make a move, sending Hae-Sung Kim back, or not back, to AAA in general. And this, we all knew this was a possibility based on the contract that he signed. The rumors that I had seen is that he left guaranteed contract with the Cubs on the table, or with some other team on the table, where he would not have been able to be sent back down. Instead, he signed that contract with the Dodgers, knowing that that was going to be a possibility. And so, we went into this too thinking, hey, Kim could be their everyday or close to everyday second baseman. What is the infield looking like for the Dodgers without Kim in the mix? And is this a short-term thing? Do you think Kim makes his way back up to Los Angeles in short order?
I think it'll probably be fairly short term, unfortunately for the Dodgers. You know, it there's many pathways here. If Mookie Betts gets hurt, he's in. If Tommy Edman gets hurt, he's in. If an outfielder gets hurt, Tommy Edman could move to the outfield, or Betts could move to the outfield and Edman move to shortstop. So there's a lot of paths. I wouldn't draft him in the next couple of weekends, our
Yeah.
big draft weekends. I wouldn't be drafting him, but I wouldn't panic if I already had. I'd probably try to hold him at least for a little bit. He's not a long-term stash in my opinion, but I'd let this play out for a little bit if I already drafted him.
Yeah, I mean, everything I read or before spring training started, Tommy Edman looked like he was going to be playing center field and then opening up second base for Kim. Now, as I double check on roster resource, of course, this puts Edman squarely at second base, with already being announced that Mookie would be playing shortstop every day. So, I say this all the time. I think that they're going to want to keep that tandem together as much as they can without mixing it up unless an injury actually comes in. So I do expect Edman and Betts to be playing in the middle of that infield until an injury forces their hand. So I agree. I do think it's going to take an injury for Kim to come back, but there are a lot of avenues for that injury to occur. Unfortunately, knock on wood, we don't want that to happen.
I think we'd have even a more clear path, but the Dodgers don't have a center fielder, right? Like it, and maybe they do change their mind and move Edman out there, and that opens up second base. I don't think the Dodgers are happy right now with Outman as the large side platoon in center field, and I don't know that you really want a platoon center fielder.
It's like
It's almost like
shortstop.
shortstop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exact. So we're repeating each other here. So yeah, there's many paths. So I would hold on for at least a little while if I already drafted Kim.
Yeah. All right, and then geez, John Heyman says that the Yankees are optimistic that Giancarlo Stanton, with not only one elbow, not only two elbows, but also a calf injury as well, that he'll be back by Memorial Day, which, if anybody tracking at home on their calendar, that's the end of May, by the way. That's beyond Acuna's expectation. You know, I can't fathom a draft unless I'm playing in a UT only league where you can only draft UT only players, that I'm even considering Stanton at this point. Do you think we'll be talking about Stanton as a fab pickup on Memorial Day weekend?
No,
No,
because a little bit of semantics here. It's actually the optimistic return date is
fair.
Memorial Day. So that's the high end,
Best case
right?
scenario,
So
yes.
the Yankees are already admitting that we probably don't see him by Memorial Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard as much as I'm not sure if we see him all season.
Right.
So, yep, you can just if you have unlimited watch spots on your watch list, go ahead and add them if you want. But if you have limits, I wouldn't even bother putting them on your watch list at this point. This was a fun one because a lot of opening day starters have been announced. Carlos Rodon was announced as the Yankees opening day starter. A couple other ones, but the one that really stands out is still in New York. Clay Holmes is going to be the New York Mets opening day starter. He's looked pretty good in spring training, stretched out as a starter. And he both earned that, and also they don't have another healthy option to really choose with the Mets, unfortunately. But the fact that he's the new guy in town. He hasn't started before, and they're still going to make him the opening day starter. Does that give you even more confidence in Clay Holmes being a starter at the major league level all season long?
It probably does a little bit, but it shouldn't. So, but the I I'm I was not in on Garrett Crochet last season during draft season, and then it was too late to be in on him.
Sure, yeah.
But this is another guy going from reliever to opening day starter, and so you have to pay attention to this. Luckily, Clay Holmes draft price isn't near what Garrett Crochet's was last season. So I do have some shares, and hopefully they work out, because so far in spring, this all looks justified.
Well, and one of the reasons why Carlos Rodon is the opening day starter for the New York Yankees, unfortunately, is because Garrett Cole went, of course, you've heard this by now, had Tommy John surgery. A lot of weird back and forth as far as like his actual procedure. At first it was like,
Yeah, sounds like he had both done, right?
yeah. So at
And the
first it's
brace.
like you heard he had the brace, and so it'll be a quicker turnaround. He might be ready for opening day next year. And then you're like, well, no, he had the brace, but he had it on top of a full surgery. So the recovery time's still the same. And so, okay, why wouldn't you get the brace in addition to doing the full surgery? Why would you leave the brace out? Maybe it wasn't an option in the past. Like maybe this is like
Yeah, I don't know.
a new thing, but I think it's probably smart. More the better, I guess. There's not really anything to say here. Garrett Cole, obviously, you're not drafting him, and you're dropping him in your first fab period if you already drafted him going into the season, if you have that ability. And I mean, we can look ahead at seeing where we want to draft him in going into 2026, but there's not really much to say here unless there's more openings in the Yankees rotation that has caught your eye.
Well, I talked a little bit last week about how I felt like Yankees fans would rather see Will Warren than Marcus Stroman, and now we see them both.
Yeah, there you go. Fair enough. All right, cool. So we'll end it out here. Of course, we have to end it with an injury just because there's so many. Parker Meadows, he's also starting the season on the IL with a nerve injury for the Detroit Tigers. No word that I could see on his expected or optimistic return for the Tigers. So both, how much is this dropping Parker Meadows? Are you dropping him if you already drafted him type of situation? And does it open up any specific spots in the outfield for the Tigers?
Well, I'm looking at the Tigers page on Roster Resource, and it is fascinating because Jason moved Glaber to the leadoff spot.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. I have Glaber on a couple teams. Anybody that has drafted Glaber Torres, gotta love that. Sure, hit an RBI a little bit. Kerry Carpenter in the 2 spot, but they're running out of players here. So as the roster is constructed right now they have Kerry Carpenter as an everyday player, no longer strong side platoon player. We don't know if this is going to come to fruition. Both of those are exciting to me. The way we've seen Spencer Torkelson maybe bouncing back after a horrendous 2024,
Mm-hmm.
after we were all excited what we saw in the second half in 2023, he's back in the lead or in the cleanup spot on Roster Resource. This is getting fun for those players, which aren't, overly expensive in drafts. Kerry Carpenter has his fans, but being a tip assumed strong side platoon hitter has kind of kept that in check as well. So the top half of the Detroit lineup is a lot of fun now with Glaber in the leadoff spot, Kerry Carpenter up to 2, and Torkelson back in that cleanup spot where we thought we would have seen him straight through ever since he made his debut. As far as Parker Meadows, yep, unfortunately, I'm not stashing him.
Yeah. Torkelson, we talked about a couple weeks ago, thinking he might not even make the opening day roster. Like
Right.
he still has options and he still has things to work through. And now all of a sudden he has an everyday role. Once again, granted, at least projected at the DH spot. Of course, that still gives the Tigers more flexibility at the corner, and they can give Colt Keith some days off and put Torkelson back at first, and et cetera, et cetera. So, if anything, might even give the Tigers more flexibility, at least giving guys days off and what have you. So we'll see if they can make lemonade out of lemons due to this situation. All right. So, as I alluded to earlier, today's episode is going to be the central topic is going to be looking at the very, very early 2025 season, looking at some trends that we have noticed on the schedule, some matchups, and some spring training highlights about some players that we think could translate that into early success in the 2025 season in April. And before we do that, we do have to take another quick break. All right, Kevin. This is fun. The fun section. So, because in the outline, you started putting together some observations of the schedule, and these are typically things that we talk about in the opportunity section of our Fab episodes. But there's a lot more of them because there's a lot more nuance, a lot more things to be looking at when it comes to the first week and a half of the season. Just because so many weird off days. Obviously, this free look that we're going to get in Japan as well. So I'm going to rattle off a couple of them, and then if there's any players that stick out based on this alone, we're going to get to some specific players to talk about in a little bit. But just the fact that Tampa and Colorado are off on opening day, which is just a travesty. I'm
So
just
stupid.
It doesn't make any sense. They both have stadiums. I mean, one of them's renting out another stadium, but they still have a home stadium. Why couldn't they just play each other? Like, even if it was a 1-day thing, like, just let them play each other. But they are off on opening day. And so make sure,
That is the series. They're just not playing on Thursday. They're playing on Friday. They are playing each other that weekend.
that's so ridiculous.
Makes it even worse.
But in those leagues where, like NFBC, where you are flipping out, we are able to flip our lineup on that first week, correct? On Thursday. I feel like
Absolutely. That's the advantage.
Mm-hmm. So you got to think about that, and obviously, if you have players on that of those teams, make sure you have coverage for those players. And then there are 14 teams that play 3 games on that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that opening weekend, the 28th through the 30th. And I'll just rattle them off here. So about almost half the league: Baltimore, Boston, Tampa Bay, Toronto, the Athletics, Seattle, Texas, Atlanta, Miami, Chicago. Excuse me, Chicago Cubs, Pittsburgh, Arizona, San Diego, and Colorado do play 3 games straight. And then the other 16 teams have just the 2 with a day off on that Friday. So I mean, it's a short little weekend. We don't normally get days off on the weekends, so you'll have to obviously consider that as you're making your final draft pick or 2 to make sure you have as many at bats and as many innings that you can get out of it. I think innings are the most important thing in this first weekend, to the thing that you can control the most, just because by the time that first Fab period rolls around, you're going to have a good idea of who's starting all those games. And so to make sure that you're looking at the expected starter list, which Kevin will get to in a second. Kevin, I appreciate you so much. You built out your own expected starter list for this episode that we can reference, because we couldn't really find one yet. So we'll just, make our own. So anybody from any of those teams kind of really stand out as somebody you could take advantage of having extra at bats or extra innings, because they have the 3 games?
The first thing that came to mind for me is if I have a Tampa or Colorado hitter that is going to typically be a mainstay in my lineup, it's only going to be on the bench for one night. But if I can get a Dodger hitter or a Cub hitter that did something in the Tokyo series to put in there that Thursday night, I know I'm getting something that for my
Mm-hmm.
Ray or Rocky that I'm sitting. I think that's one thing. Ideally, I would have a Ray or a Rocky to sub in for or excuse me, a Dodger or a Cub to sub in for my Ray or my Rocky just for that one night. It's a 1 day scoring period as far as hitters go.
Yeah.
And then having half the teams, roughly, just half the teams playing 2 games and half the teams playing 3 games on that opening weekend. Um, I think, and this is something that I am going to talk more about later. But it's really easy to say it's opening weekend. It, my guy only has 2 games. I'm fine with that. Well, a lot of these teams face a lefty and a righty in those 2 games over the weekend. So it is worth it taking the time. I mean, in this opening weekend, half of a scoring period, which we have 52 of during the season, this may be the one where you can capitalize on the
Mhm.
most. We typically don't have a lot of teams with a day off on the 3-day weekend. And
Yep.
we're talking 50%, maybe 100% more plate appearances for some of these guys that are playing 3 games because the teams playing 2 games are facing a lefty and a
You're gonna
right-handed
get day off
starter.
anyway. Yep.
I mean, we're looking at if you are prepared, especially if you haven't drafted yet, because you can take this into consideration as you're drafting, right? We're to the point where the ends of our drafts is our fab. We talk about that every season, right? When we start getting close to the season, the last few rounds of our draft is our fab, so we don't have to waste any money on that first Friday.
Mhm.
Um, Although, if a couple of the Cubs and Dodgers, even if they do great for me, I'm not keeping them on my roster after that Friday. I'll thank them and send them on their way. That's
Sure.
great. So, but we don't want too much to do that first Friday. Paying attention to this, there, 5 or 6 spots in your lineup of an extra game for a weekend. We're talking
Yeah.
you could get a jump of 25 or more at bats on the first weekend of the season on what you would have if you're not paying attention to this.
Yeah. I always say, if you're playing in a head-to-head league, you should be paying attention to the September schedule. Obviously, all of this depends on format, but if you can take advantage in a roto league at any time in the season, you
Yes.
should. And so this is why we're paying so close attention to this opening weekend, because we have more control. To your point, you have more control, you have more opportunity to take advantage and manipulate your roster, both through a draft and through fab. Couple other things to mention: the Chicago Cubs, of course, we know that they have 2 games overseas in Japan against the Dodgers, the 18th and 19th. But they also play opening day and a 3-game series over the
Yeah.
weekend. So they have the Thursday game, and then they have the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The Dodgers only have the 2-game weekend. They are playing opening day, but they have the off day on Friday. So Cubs with that added advantage. So if you're going to speculate on Tokyo players, maybe at least focus more on the Cubs than the Dodgers because of that fact.
Yes. One more game there. Once again, I just as I mentioned earlier, my TGFBI league ended today. This is my last 3 picks: Justin Turner, John Birdie, which I think Vidal Brujan is just as good a pick as John Birdie there. I could have went either way. We know Nico Horner's out. One of these guys is probably going to do something in that series. And then even though the platoon matchups don't match up for him, my last round pick, James Outman from the Dodgers, just because I'll know I'm either putting him in my lineup or I'm dropping him on that Friday night right away. So I took my last 3 round players I took from that series. And I think it's especially the great thing about the Justin Turner one is we will know 2 out of the 3 games how it turned out. This is a spot where in season, when we don't have the free look, 3 lefties for Justin Turner, yeah, jump on him in fab, but we'll know the outcome of 2 of those 3 games. I would assume I'm going to have Justin Turner in my lineup for that opening Thursday night, but if he's horrible in Tokyo, I won't.
Yeah, and Uncle Ted, just as Uncle Ted's talking about taking prospects instead of these guys, we're talking about
for a week.
early return. We're talking about early
Yeah.
return rather than a stash. In a
Those
strong
prospects will be available in that first fab period where I'm drafting these guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact is, we got to remember that because the season hasn't started yet
Right.
in Fab, that first Fab period, yes, you can Fab the
Get rid
prospect.
of all of them.
Yep, they're still in the player pool until games have actually started stateside. A couple other notes looking at the schedule here. Minnesota and Houston have the Friday, the 4th off. We're looking a little bit further ahead after having a game first half. So they've got the 4 games Monday through Thursday, but then they have the weird Friday off day as well. Cincinnati and Milwaukee have the full 7 game in that first full week, with Cincinnati playing 3 against the Rangers and 4 at Milwaukee, and then Milwaukee playing 3 against your Royals, and then of course 4 against Cincinnati, hosting Cincinnati. Everyone else has 6, so nobody has the weird 5, that Monday Thursday off day or Monday Friday. Boston, Kansas City, Minnesota, and Toronto have the 7-game week on the following week, looking at on April 7th. So a lot to
and nobody has, I didn't write this down, but going along with this, nobody has a 5-game week until the week beginning April 21st. So we'll be 3.5 weeks into the season before we have to worry about that. For the first couple of weeks, the very few teams that are getting 7 games, everybody else is getting 6.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of this again, I got one eye on the chat here. Uncle Ted making a point. He's about to jump into a 50-round draft and hold. A lot of this strategy can be even more useful in a draft and hold because you're able to really drive into getting these players on your bench and guarantee playing time. As simple as that.
Some guaranteed stats.
Yes.
Albeit only 2 games worth, but to know whether you want them in your lineup or not, especially hitters that Thursday night, just knowing that in a draft and hold where those players are going to be drafted anyway.
Yeah.
I think was the point you're getting at there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a couple of teams that we always have our eye. Well, we always have our eye on Colorado's home games and Cincinnati's home games, and also Colorado's away games. Of course, Colorado is playing their first 2 series on the road, and their first game at Coors isn't until April 4th, that following Monday, as we talked about earlier. And so that's going to be, you always talk about this too. It's like that first game back in Colorado, and the first game out of Colorado, always going to be something that you're targeting against their pitchers, as well.
Yeah, that's a weekend series. The second full week of the season begins on April 7th. So when I draft Colorado players, I have coverage. There's not a Colorado player that I want in my lineup on the road all the time. Maybe sometimes, but so I have coverage for them, and this is an instance where I'm careful. Colorado's going back to Coors as a new thing too,
Right.
kind of. I mean, Arizona isn't a whole lot, not as much different than Colorado than the rest of the league, but Colorado is going to have played 2 series in other parts of the country. So they're almost like a road team coming into Colorado. I'm not sure I'd just automatically throw my Rockies in that first series. That's the point.
Yep. And then the other 2 teams that we talk about a lot, they have new stadiums that they're playing in their home games this year. We'll start with the Athletics because that's all we're allowed to call them. They played their first games in West Sacramento, starting on Monday the 31st with 3-game series versus the Cubs. So another reason to like the Cubs players in this early part of the season. They get to try out the bandbox in West Sacramento first, besides the Athletics themselves. But then the Athletics, their next series, they end the week in Colorado. So not only do they get to try out the minor league stadium, but then they travel right to Colorado as well. So I think a lot of people are catching on to that because a lot of their offensive names are shooting up boards. Saw Lawrence Butler go pretty high in one of those main events draft boards that I saw posted as well. So, do what you can there. I'll talk about. I'll throw out a couple names a little bit later as well. The names that you might be considering later on in drafts to take advantage of that. But then Tampa Bay, and you mentioned this as a whole last week, as they're playing a lot of their home games in the first half of the season. Well, 19 of their first 22 games are in their quote new ballpark. What's nice about this is the Tampa Bay Rays are actually playing in Tampa now, as they play in their new stadium. So, but they get to spend as much time there as possible in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. So, again, we'll talk a little bit more about some players that we might be considering to take advantage of that fact a little bit later as well. But I wanted to make sure that was announced.
I don't remember if I said this when we were talking about it before, Adam, but don't sleep on right-handed hitters for the Rays. I mean, I think we automatically assume lefties short porch, right? We assume that for Yankee Stadium, and this is Yankee Stadium with hot and humid weather. So we're salivating at this for left-handed hitters. But the ballpark factors for home runs at Yankee Stadium are, I forget, I don't have in front of me. They're either the same or even better for righties. Because when you have that short of a porch, you don't have to completely get a hold of it when you go oppo, right? DJ LeMahieu, that perfect example of the season he had in Yankee Stadium. So don't sleep on righties in that ballpark as well.
Yeah, as long as they're righties that aren't strictly pulling the ball.
Exactly.
If they're righties that can go all around, and I knew I was waiting for Uncle Ted to make a comment as soon as you started touting right-handed hitters in any capacity. But they have a place. Okay, Uncle Ted. All right, cool. Well, that's some fun things to go over, and we're gonna go over a lot more in just a little bit. But what I really want to do is, Kevin, I want you to really go through this this starter grid that you made for opening weekend, and just let's go through it line by line and see if there's any names that kind of pop out, not only on the pitcher side with the matchups that they might see, but also, of course, the hitters that are going to be facing them, if there's anything that really stands out as far as opportunity goes. And then what we're going to do.
When I made it, I was looking mostly at hitters. I think I only made one note about a pitcher.
Great. Well, we won't talk a whole lot of pitchers then, because the notes I made for players we're going to be looking at late round possible schedule beneficiaries. I mean, most of my notes on hitters there too, so that's good.
Nice.
Hitter centric.
There's enough pitcher coverage on this website.
Yeah, I've heard. I've heard some things. All right, well, let's get into this. You know what though? Before we do that, I got to take another break. All right, Kevin. I'm going right down the list. You did this nice. You did this in no particular order. Oh, you did it. You did. It is in divisional round. I was hoping you just randomly threw names on a piece of paper and hopefully it stuck. We'll start in Baltimore here. The thing that stands out the most here is that they are.
I didn't even put the pitchers' names in.
You didn't have to
for that reason.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're facing all right-handed pitchers against Toronto's rotation. And Toronto doesn't even have any. Well, they have one lefty in their bullpen as well. So that doesn't seem like they'll be facing a whole lot of left-handed pitching.
Right. And some players to think about when you're drafting this weekend, maybe worth a bump. But these guys are being drafted even in most 12-team leagues, but fairly late. So you might want to give him a little bump. Cedric Mullins becoming more and more of a platoon guy. And then sometimes when he's not, we feel like he should be. But that's 4 games versus righties. Ryan O'Hearn, who was so great in this role last year, I think he's kind of forgotten about. But Baltimore has not made any indication that as long as he continues to perform, he's not going to continue to get playing time versus right-handed starters. And then Jackson Holiday, the reason I added him, there's a few 12s where he might not have been drafted. So you may want to take a look at that. But mostly it's, you know what? If I did draft him, I might be comfortable just throwing him out there in my lineup, even though if I drafted him as kind of a stash and wanted to see how he would start, maybe throw him out there against these 4 righties.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, Toronto also set to face 4 righties in the Baltimore rotation between Eflin, Morton, Kramer, and
Oh,
probably.
oh yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I
My
skipped.
bad.
I skipped a
Yes,
couple
we're going to
lines.
see nothing but righties in that game, that series. That's what I was looking at earlier as well. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, with the apparent supposed health of Dalton Varsho, that's the name that stuck out to you here on the notes here. He could
Yeah.
take advantage of that fact as well.
I'd probably bump him a round or 2 in my drafts this weekend. He's already moving up because of the unsuspected earlier coming back healthy and getting to start out versus the 4 righties. I mean, he's going just inside the top 300, and even in main events. And this news may have come out slightly after some of the main event drafts started, because this is fairly recent with Varsho that we're getting. But his min is still at pick over 300, 302.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
if you want Varsho, if he's the news I saw today is he's actually healthy enough to play defense, and that's his value for the Blue Jays. So if he's healthy enough to play center fielder, I wouldn't expect him to play all 4 games. They're going to give him an off day, I'm sure. But when you're getting a guy after 300 that we didn't talk about on our 2020 show, I don't think you might have brought him up, but we didn't have him on the outline. But I think you might have brought him up. If you can get a guy that has 2020 potential after pick 300 and in the leagues where he wasn't drafted, which was a lot of them, especially 12s, you probably want to pick him up that first fab period.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, we move on to let's start off in the AL East with the Boston Red Sox set to face off 4 righties of their own against the Texas Rangers in their opening series. Yeah, who stands out here as far as, again, maybe if it's a platoon or just there's a lot of flux happening in Boston with a lot of players not being ready for opening day. We didn't mention it. Lucas Giolito is set to be on the IL. We talked about Brian Bayo not being ready. Willie Ibar has just been cleared to get back into the field in spring training, so there's no guarantee he'll be ready for opening day as well. So yeah, what stands out on the Red Sox, at least what you see?
Yeah, as always, when we come to Boston, I have questions for you.
Sure.
Right? We saw Devers yesterday switch. Yep,
Saying all the right things now. Yep.
saying the right things. So roster resource still has Devers at third base, Bregman at second base, right? Yoshida at DH. If Devers moves to DH, that definitely moves Bregman to third base.
Oh, of course.
That's the whole point of it. That Bregman's a great defender at third base. My question for you, especially with these pitching matchups they have that opening weekend, I want David Hamilton at second base if that is the case. Is that what we'll see?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I think it is at least 3 out of the 4 games. It's not obviously it's not a platoon thing because it's all right-handed pitchers or starters.
Right, but they're going to get everybody in the lineup the first weekend. Yeah.
But Hamilton's having a pretty good spring. He started at shortstop the other day as well. So it's like I do believe the Red Sox have a plan of action for Hamilton to, he'll make the opening day roster.
And part of it's for when Story gets hurt. So they're having to do that.
It's not if, but when. Yeah. And I mean, I think this is just even more solidifying the fact that Kristen Campbell and probably Roman Anthony are not going to be on the opening day roster as much as I would like to see that happen. I'm a big David Hamilton fan myself anyway, so maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but I do see Hamilton being able to take advantage of at least of this opening weekend and being in there. And we talk about this all the time with guys like Hamilton and Rojas in Philadelphia and a couple other players. Hamilton can be valuable even if he's not starting the game. But
Right.
the fact that they're facing 4 righties as their starters makes it more likely he will start. Will he finish every game? That's a question. Like that'll be the
Mhm.
question. But if he's actually starting 3 or 4 of these games over opening weekend, that's still money in the bank. Like that's still, he's going to have an opportunity to steal you bases as long as he can get on base. Of course, you can't steal first, at least not on the stat sheet, and go from there. But they probably won't be facing Jacob deGrom, as he was announced that he'll probably be their number 5 to start the season, just to
Mhm.
give him a couple extra days to ramp up. So I'm, as a Red Sox fan, I'm okay with that. Though Jacob deGrom does have a history of letting up stolen bases quite a bit. So I wouldn't be opposed to that aspect of the game, but I don't really want to face him either. So as he comes back. Let's skip around then go to Texas on the other side of the ball here, as they face off against my Red Sox in that opening series. They will be facing the first lefty that we're going to be talking about, of course. Garrett Crochet should be it will be their opening day starter. Tanner Houck, Walker Buehler, and you've got Quinn Priester on here as the number 4 to start. I hate and love that prediction. As
I got that. I got that from Roster Resource.
Okay. All right.
And
That's fair. I like the idea, and I would we would bring this up anyway. So I'm just going to mold these two conversations into here. One of my volume picks here would have been Richard Fitz, taking that either 4th or 5th spot. As I mentioned, Brian Bayo not going to be ready, Lucas Giolito not going to be ready, or going to be on the IL specifically to start the season. Does open up 2 spots in that rotation. And really, the idea is that who will take that final spot? Would it be Fitz or would it be Priester? And there might be 2 opening spots here. So are you saying that you like the roster resource prediction here, or what's your take on the possibility of Fitz instead?
no, it's not necessarily that I like slash 100% agreed with it, but when I was making this list, I did bold all of the starters that have been announced, so we know those are true. And then when there was a couple of spots where, yeah, I looked at this Priester Fitz and thought about, well, should I put Fitz in there? But for the purpose of my grid, all that matters is they're both righties. So I just wrote
Fair.
Priester down. Yeah.
You could have just put the R. I guess that would have been fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then on the Texas side, then anybody stand out that can take advantage of that fact?
Well, Texas has got a pretty set lineup, not a whole lot of platoons in there, but we all love Jock Peterson versus righties. So I'd sit him that first Thursday night versus Crochet and then let him eat for the weekend, 3 righties.
Yeah, I mean, that's nice. Obviously, that's nice for us knowing that the lefties coming before the day that we can flip over our rosters,
Yep.
or our lineups, excuse me. All right,
Exactly.
let's go back and finish out the AL East here on your grid. In the New York Yankees, one of those teams that has the off day on that Friday as they face off against the Milwaukee Brewers in New York. They'll be facing off against Peralta on that Thursday, and then off on Friday, facing off against Tobias Myers, and then their former teammate Nestor Cortez on that Sunday. So they've got a mix of that righty lefty, as you mentioned before. There are some teams that are going to see that over the weekend. The Yankees are one of them. And then on the other side here, as I go down to Milwaukee, they are in the same boat. They get the lefty on that Thursday against Rodon, and then they get the split up against Max Fried and Marcus Stroman with the lefty and the righty mix on Saturday, Sunday. And so is this a situation where you're just, especially in that opening where you have the flexibility, you want to make sure you have the coverage for the players that are going to be hurt? Not only the players that are not going to play, but also the players that are going to play, but probably don't have better splits against the opposite-handed pitchers, or same-handed pitchers either way. How are you kind of handling those situations?
I think this affects Milwaukee more than New York. They have more matchup type players, more platoon players. Bryce Turang, Sal Frelick, Oliver Dunn could all sit versus lefties. Um, and they have Caleb Durbin, Mark Canha is a non-roster invitee right now in spring training that can play against lefties. So there could be a pretty good shakeup here, and you already know at most you're getting 2 games in the 3 days from this team. So that makes it tough. Other than the top half of the lineup, then I would be, and I'm probably looking for coverage for those guys as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't find it in the top for the top guys in the top half of the lineup, it's not as bad. But yeah, if you have Terang for stolen bases, he may only get 1 game that weekend. 1 out of 3. That's not cutting it. Sure, he can get in there later in the season. If I know I need stolen bases,
Sure.
I'd play Terang in that spot, right? Because he doesn't have to start to get a stolen bases. We talk about this all the time. We've talked about it this episode, but first week of the season and I have Bryce Terang on my team, I'm assuming I'm not going to need every single little stolen base Bryce Terang gets. He can get me 50. So Milwaukee, I think it affects more. The Yankees lineup, with it being opening weekend, and with some of their things, they will move some guys in and out. But the big one that I would avoid if he is in the starting lineup on a semi-regular basis, Ben Rice is going to get a day off. Roster Resource has him as a platoon bat anyway,
Anyway,
so he's going to probably miss that game versus the lefty.
yeah.
That's what I'm looking at there.
Going back to Bryce Terang and Milwaukee running in general, Milwaukee's been running more than pretty much anybody else in spring training. And so
Yeah.
some of the names that really stood out to me were Sal Frelick and Caleb Durbin, who are each 4 for 4 in stolen bases this spring training.
Mhm.
Caleb Durbin also starting a lot at third base as well. So, um, you don't typically want to target a lefty on the mound when you're hoping guys are going to be stolen bases. They don't run as often. Obviously, they're just staring you down at first base. That's just the
Yeah.
position that they're sitting at. But there's going to be opportunity for this team to run in general. And so, yeah, if you think you can get stolen bases out of any of these guys, and that you have to have them in your lineup, just know they're probably all going to run at some point, especially against the righty when they have the opportunity. Cool. So we're moving on. Then we'll finish out the AL East with Tampa Bay. They are one of those 2 teams that don't have the opening day game on the 27th on that Thursday, but they do have 3 games Friday, Saturday, Sunday as they host Colorado in Tampa Bay, actually in Tampa, with 2 righties and a lefty expected on the Colorado side. Well, Colorado will be sending out their pitchers. Or they'll be sending out, Colorado's the one sending out 2 righties and a lefty, where Tampa Bay will be also sending out 2 righties and a lefty, but on different days, with McClanahan expected to be their opening day starter on that Friday. And then Taj Bradley and Ryan Pepio closing it out Saturday, Sunday. There's a lot to unpack in Tampa, in my opinion, especially on
Mhm.
the Tampa side, just because if we can take advantage of that ballpark against the Colorado pitching in general, we should probably be considering doing that. And the names that stood out to me, especially the ones that you can get later on in your drafts, are Danny Jansen, who I grabbed, and he's their starting catcher in Tampa Bay. And then Jonathan Aranda, also rounding that out, going post 300 in recent drafts, not just the main event, but all drafts in the month of March. So between those guys, does Danny Jansen in that ballpark, assuming he's really the only catcher option that Tampa has, especially offensively, does he get 500 at bats? Does he hit your 500 mark that you're looking for? And you can get him very, very, very late.
Unfortunately, he doesn't have a health record that gives me confidence in that. The
For
team
sure.
context, 100%, he should, right? He should be one of the dozen or so catchers or less actually that get to 500 plate appearances, you would think. But I think health keeps him from that. But I think it's a great point that he's an option here. It is, this is kind of the standard, right? It's kind of the average of what we think we're going to see when we're setting our lineups on Friday. Two righties and a lefty. That's typically what we could expect. So I don't think there's a whole lot here, but I agree with you um, on your points on Danny Jansen, and Jonathan Aranda is the guy that I would take a look at. There may be some 12s where he's available.
Dan Jansen, just one of those names that if you are in a single catcher league and you decided you're going to just stream catchers all season long,
Mhm.
start off with Danny Jansen because you didn't have
Right.
to draft him. You can draft him with your last pick, and then you can drop him when he's not healthy anymore because, like you said, he doesn't have the track record, but he's healthy now. And he gets to play 19 of his first 22 games of the season in Florida without a roof. All right, we're out of the AL East. Let's jump over to the AL Central, where the Chicago White Sox are hosting the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim with the first game on that Thursday, facing off against probably Kikuchi, the lefty. Whereas will be putting out, as I scroll down here, okay, Martin Perez, already announced actually as the opening day roster, if I'm not mistaken, for the White Sox, also lefty, so lefty on lefty action to start off in Chicago. They'll be off on Friday and then splitting up. The Angels should be splitting up a righty and a lefty with Soriano and Anderson going, while the White Sox throw out Martin and Burke, both righties, for the Angels to face off. So with those matchups, was there any players that kind of stood up taking advantage of those situations?
Yeah, I noticed I'm missing some. I'm missing Friday's pitcher for LA, but that without the one guy I noticed here with there being a lefty going opening night. Any lefties going on Thursday night, I'm looking for some coverage, right? There could be a nice matchup. And I know he's a number 9 hitter, but if you are in a bind and you have uh a Tampa or Colorado player that you need coverage for, and they're off Thursday night, and you can literally drop this guy that very weekend before before the rest of the season gets going. I'm looking at Michael A. Taylor as a possibility because the White Sox are facing a lefty that night. That would be in a crunch. I love Michael A. Taylor, but without knowing how he's going to be used throughout the season. I don't have a ton of confidence in what we'll see from him yet, plus being at the bottom of the lineup for the White Sox. But yeah, as we've talked for seasons now, Michael A. Taylor is a 2020 pace guy. He doesn't play full seasons worth of at bats, but he's a 2020 pace guy. So if I need someone on Thursday, he's definitely an option. And on some of my teams, he's probably better than what I have.
Yeah. So don't be deterred. As I was looking at Michael A. Taylor in one of my drafts, don't be deterred when you look at his last couple seasons batting averages, finals numbers. Is like, this is going to be a very streaky player as well. So if
Mhm.
you get that right streak in those right
100%.
matchups, you'll be able to take advantage of the good that actually keeps that batting average up above 200 for the season long line.
And same with the Angels, right? Because they're facing a lefty on Thursday. If I draft Joe Adell, I have concerns. He may end up more short side platoon than everyday player. Right now, it looks like they want him to be an everyday player, but they get a lefty on opening night. I only need him in my lineup that one night.
Mhm.
And then also Shanuel, who I know you've drafted a time or two, I believe, and I have in a spot or two going really late. And we started to see a little bit of power to go with this great contact ability. And so for the three righties over the weekend, he could be available in some leagues, even those that have already drafted.
Right. All right, let's move it along here as we head to the Cleveland Guardians. They face off against your Royals, where, of course, Cole Reagans will be starting us off on Thursday. The lefty, and then against Lugo and Waka, both righties, over the weekend, where your Kansas City Royals will be facing off against Tanner Bybee, the righty, and all righties throughout the course of the weekend, even with the off day in between. So I'm glad. I love that you made a note about Massey here, just as somebody to look at, because I just drafted him in. I think I drafted him in Razslam just because I wanted as many infielders as possible for the best ball format there. And from what everything I'm reading as well, there's opportunity for Massey to be playing in the outfield possibly, or at least getting some rotation. I don't know how long it would actually take him to get outfield eligibility in season, but knowing that it's a possibility is nice to know.
Yeah, Jonathan India has actually played in the outfield more often than Michael Massey in spring training thus far. And we've started to get into that time of spring training where I don't know that we've seen any actual opening day lineups yet, but we're seeing, 6 or 7 guys each day at this point. And Massey's getting much more time at second base than India. We're seeing him more often in left field and even third base. So I'm pretty confident in they may try to sit Massey versus lefties, but this is a pretty good matchup. I hope this isn't just the homer in me, Adam, but this little swing adjustment for MJ Melendez really does look like it might be what he needed. And if that's the case, he won't be a platoon bat for very long. But for that opening weekend, it's great. Kyle Isbell, if you're in a pinch, he'll be out there because he is the starting center fielder. One guy I didn't put in the notes on the other side, though, for Cleveland, once again, that Thursday night, one night versus a lefty. So the righties will be in there. Big Christmas. As much as I don't want to see Cole Reagans give up a home run, that's if I had to bet on where it'll come from, that's where I'd put my money.
Kyle Isbell, though, 5 for 5 on the base paths during spring training. Second, actually, the only other 5 for 5 is Zach Veen. And somebody I was going to talk about earlier on, the only one to beat both of them is Nasim Nunez of Washington, who's stolen 7 bases. So Isbell, if he's out there every single day for the weekend and you want to get a head start on stolen bases, that could be something that carries over. And we always see this as a team. Stolen bases will trend over from March into April, especially as the ball doesn't fly as far. We're starting to see we're seeing teams run a little bit more just because they need to do a little bit more on the base paths to move the scoring along. And so I like looking at Kyle Isbell for at least the stolen bases out there in a pinch early on. All right. Back to the chart here. All right, moving over to the Detroit Tigers as they do face off against the Los Angeles Dodgers. As in the you know what? I don't even know. Oh, that's right. The Dodgers are an interesting situation only because they have the 2 games in Tokyo. Where they've already announced obviously Yamamoto was going to be the starter, but did they announce that Sasaki would be the game 2 starter? Yep. Okay, cool.
Sasaki versus Steele for game 2.
Yep. So I mean that still lines these guys up to be able to pitch in this opening weekend stateside as well. So they're in that mix, but where they fall, I think, doesn't mean just because they were opening day 1 and 2 in Tokyo doesn't mean they'll be opening day 1 and 2 stateside as well. So how do you see the Dodgers rotation ironing itself out at least to start the season?
Well, the way I look at this is whether they start over with Yamamoto and Sasaki or not, that there's only one lefty in the current rotation, and we will see him that opening weekend. He would either be Sunday. I kind of guess we might see him in the first stateside game, right? We may see him on Thursday versus Detroit, and that's Blake Snell. He's the only lefty in there.
Mhm.
So, for the purposes of this, Detroit will be facing two righties and a lefty at the LA Dodgers, and those righties could be Yamamoto, Sasaki, Glasnow, and then the lefty they're facing is Snell. I I'm not really worried about it. I'm trying to avoid my Detroit hitters that weekend, probably, right? Um, I'm not looking for a platoon bat to get in there in one game versus Snell. If it was Thursday night, that would be a different story. But the the deal is we have 28 of 30 teams playing Thursday night, so that's not going to be too big of an issue for most of us.
Mhm.
The problem comes over the weekend when if um, if it's Snell over the weekend, then it's a righty and a lefty that Detroit is facing. So I'm gonna try to avoid my Tigers on opening weekend if I can. The Dodgers is a little different story, right? Because we have that two games that plays into Thursday. If it's pitching, it plays into the whole weekend. And I'm looking at pretty much the Dodgers' entire projected bench just because they are looking to start off against three straight lefties, Imanaga and Steele in Tokyo, and then Skubal on opening night. Now, these are good pitchers, all three of them. So it's not like we're attacking them. But as far as platoon matchups go, if I can get you know, a player in there on Thursday and get some stats, it's great. So Miguel Rojas, we're gonna have two games that we know, right? And if you're drafting, sure, you can take some of these guys late, like I did in TGFBI. I took a couple of these guys late, but these guys might be available in the first fab of run of the season, and you play them for one night and get three games worth, possibly, right? Miguel Rojas, Chris Taylor, Enrique Hernandez, all three of those guys for the Dodgers. If they do anything, they're not being drafted. So if they do
Mhm.
anything, you're going to want them. And then even though they're facing lefties, it could be a pinch hit, it could be a random start. And I have James Outman listed here as well to keep an eye on for that Tokyo series to see if I want them just for one night on my roster.
Yeah, and you made a great point there that all you have to do is you just have to have them in your lineup on the Thursday to get
Mhm.
the earlier Tokyo stats. They don't have to be in your lineup for over the weekend.
Right.
So if you can take advantage of that lefty matchup, man, Snell versus Skubal opening day, that sounds like a
That would be
very,
cool.
very fun day.
Yeah, that would be
Very
cool.
fun time. All right, going down. We already want to talk about Kansas City. Minnesota, they face off against St. Louis here with a off day on that Friday. But Minnesota should be facing off against three righties in their three-game series. Sonny Gray, Fede, and Mikolas on the St. Louis side. And then St. Louis will be facing off against Minnesota's Lopez, Ryan, and Ober, also three righties. So an all-righty affair in Minnesota. In St. Louis with Minnesota involved. So we talk about all the time Minnesota with one of the biggest platoon situations in all of baseball now. There's got to be some players that can take advantage of this.
Yeah, even with the off day, since it's both righties over the weekend, this would be par for the course. And Trevor Larnach and Wallner, right? We'll get them both in there against the righties, 2 out of 3. If they were playing 3 games and one of them was against a lefty, we would play them that weekend. So having a day off, both against the righty, sure, maybe they'd have got a pinch hit and an extra at bat, but roughly the same. And St. Louis, uh, it's Nolan Gorman, Victor Scott. I mean, they're not nearly as appealing as Larnack and Wallner, in my opinion, but they're in the same situation.
Sure. Yeah, Gorman.
Maybe even Alec Burleson as well.
Alec Burleson seems to be the one that's going to be pushed into a platoon situation or more of a part-time role than I think he may have deserved after his performance last year. Gorman, you almost expect it unless Arenado was going to end up being traded. But he wasn't. So Gorman's going to have to find his playing time by switching between second base and DH for the Cardinals. And so, I think the more of a platoon situation is in the cards for him as well. Pun completely intended. All right, so we go to Houston. We'll go over to the AL West here. The Houston Astros face off against the Mets with opening day starter Clay Holmes. They do have the 4-game series. They will get 3 out of 4 righties here between Holmes, Senga, and McGill, with Peterson being the lone lefty that the Mets should be throwing out there. And then on the Mets will be facing off, obviously, against Houston's rotation. As I can find things. Yeah. All right. With kind of a similar situation with Valdez, Brown, Blanco, more righties than lefties here that we should be expecting on the Mets to be facing off against as well. So with all the lefty heavy situations here, any hitters that we could take advantage of?
Yeah, once again, with that being a Thursday night that the Mets will face a lefty, it's opening night, but we might not see their, typical best starting lineup out there. We may see both Luis Angel Acuna and Starlin Marte. So they are players I would consider to use on that Thursday evening. And for Houston, there's not a whole lot here, but I will take this opportunity to bring up. I think a lot of people realized it quicker than I did, but there's still people that haven't. Cam Smith might have a real opportunity to crack this lineup opening day, and that's what I would be keeping my eye on with Houston.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw. Oh, man, who was it? Somebody posted. I'm not on Twitter very often, but
It was in right field again today, so
he's one of the most added players in Yahoo over the last week. That at Yahoo's draft.
I want to play in a league where you can pick up players right now.
Yeah. Those daily moves, man. Those daily move leagues. Fastest fingers. Sometimes it's fun. Most of the time, it's very frustrating.
Yes.
All right. Stay in the AL West here with the Oakland. You didn't update this. You threw me off here. I'm like, had a Ron Burgundy moment. Just reading what the prompter says. The Athletic.
I even bolded it intentionally.
You did. The Athletics of West Sacramento face off against Seattle, where Seattle should be throwing out their aces of Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, Bryce Miller, and Brian Wu with the 4-game series here, where Seattle should be facing off against West Sacramento's Severino, Springs, Sears, and Spence. So we've got a pair of lefties on the Oakland side, all righties across the board from Seattle. So obviously a little bit more of a concern, but because you do expect to see the 2 lefties playing over the weekend, are there any short side platoons that we can take advantage of on the Oakland side? I've got some names in general that I'm looking at later in drafts just to take advantage of the West Sacramento ballpark. Tell me if any of these guys kind of fit the bill. Seth Brown, Miguel Andujar, and Gio Urshela. Andujar, all 3 of these guys are really kind of they're fighting each other for playing time in different capacities. But do any of these guys not only look like they crack and take advantage of crack the lineup, the opening day lineup, and then take advantage of these platoons that they're going to see in the opening weekend?
Yeah. So the problem with platoons for the Athletics, I'll say it right, is that we're facing Gilbert, Castillo, Miller, and Wu, right? They're really good pitchers, so that's a problem. But the Soderstrom you mentioned, I'd also add Seth Brown as well. It still looks like he's the starting left fielder, at least on that side of a platoon for right now. I'm still hopeful we see Brent Rooker out there getting outfield eligibility. But Seth Brown for that opening weekend for righties, yeah, and Tyler Soderstrom, both these guys available in leagues that have drafted, especially 12s. On the other side, I mentioned earlier, I only listed one pitcher, and it's because it's at Seattle. It's because he's a lefty. And so that helps the platoon splits because that batter's eye whole situation hurts right-handed hitters more than lefties in Seattle. So yeah, JP Sears, I'm not nearly as excited about him as I was last season. And it's really not his performance. I know it was up and down, but there was value in JP Sears did when you were playing matchups. It's more about I think I'm in the minority now. I think people really think that West Sacramento is neutral or leaning pitcher favorable. I still think hitters are going to take advantage of that minor league ballpark. That's why I'm hesitant on JP Sears this season over last season. But at Seattle, with the platoon matchups, meaning the righties are the ones with the bad batter's eye, I'm in. And then yes, I did put an explanation exclamation point, excuse me,
Yeah,
behind
fair.
Dylan Moore's name here. We've talked about him a lot, but anytime I'm getting 2 out of 3 lefties over a weekend, Dylan Moore will be in my lineup.
Yeah, fair enough. And I don't know if this will go that far ahead, but it's pretty calm in Sacramento right now. As far as temperature goes, it's pretty much just hitting around 60 all the time.
Yeah, it's still March.
Well, I don't know, man. I am in a heat wave right now in the middle of the country in Indianapolis. We've been hitting like the high 70s all week,
Oh,
and it's
wow.
been amazing.
Oh, yeah. That's like here. You're
Yeah,
good.
exactly. And so, but let's just remember, maybe not just in March and April, but as soon as that summer hits, Sacramento
Oh,
is
yeah.
so hot. It might as well be the desert. It's easily a good 15 to 20 degrees warmer in Sacramento and West Sacramento than it is in San Francisco at any given point. I think people consider those two very close to each other. They're not far. They're about maybe an hour drive, depending on how fast you're driving.
Yep.
But it's a very different climate, a very different situation. So we'll see how that irons itself out throughout the course of the season. All right, so we talked about Texas already. Atlanta, we'll go move into the National League now. Atlanta is facing off against San Diego in San Diego, where San Diego pitchers are going to be thrown out by the names of Cease, King, Darvish, and Pavetta. Of course, all righties in their own right as well, where San Diego will face off against Atlanta's Sale, Lopez, Schwellenbach, and Holmes, with Sale being the opening day starter as the lone lefty. So they'll be getting all righties over the weekend as well. We talked about Jared Kelenic as, that strong side of the platoon should be getting plenty of time against all of these righties that San Diego's throwing out there to open up the season. But anybody else kind of stand out on either side being able to take advantage of this situation?
Not really. Jared Kelenic was the name I looked at, but as we talked earlier, I'm not putting him in my lineup on the opening weekend of the season. I have to see quite a bit from Kelenic before I would do that. And he's really the only option here. Atlanta's got a pretty stable lineup. On the other side, I do have Jason Hayward marked. If he is indeed going to be the big side platoon, then I want him in my lineup over the weekend versus the righties. And right now, Jason over at Roster Resource has him as the big side platoon, heading towards the bottom of the lineup. But with that lineup, it's not like we've talked about the Houston lineup, Atlanta lineup in the past. It's probably not quite there, but this is a stout lineup. So if Jason Hayward's in there, I would have some interest in deep leagues. They have Connor Joe as his platoon partner. I'm not so sure about that, but if that is the case, he would be an option for that Thursday night. However, this is when I I have to remind myself to pull back a little bit and not be looking at just the handedness of the pitcher. And it's Chris Sale.
Mhm.
So I'm not running out to go throw guys in
Yeah,
my
sure.
lineup versus Chris Sale, right? But
Fair.
but it is options in deep leagues. And then if we have listeners that are in, mono leagues, then these guys definitely are in play.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, we move down into the AL East deeper. Miami faces off against the Pittsburgh Pirates, where the Pirates, of course, will throw out Skeens as their opening day starter, followed by Keller, Jones, and Heaney, expected, with Heaney being the only lefty here. So all righties on that side as well. Miami should be throwing out, should be throwing out Alcantara. They already said that he's going to be opening roster, so it's not should be. He is the opening day starter for the Miami Marlins. Followed by a mix of Ryan Weathers, Cabrera, and Myers. Fun stat as I was looking up players to consider. The only pitcher that Miami is the only pitcher being drafted in the top 300 of drafts, going into, in March drafts, has been Alcantara. So Ryan Weathers is a close behind at 315 ADP based on the March drafts that I looked at. But yeah, it's always fun to kind of see like the trends of like a particular team not getting players drafted or at a certain position, especially generally as a pitcher. Ryan Weathers seems to really be I don't say the darling, but the one that's really getting a lot more hype in the last 2 or 3 days or weeks, as spring training moves along, and he's showing some, fun things in spring training, and has, had ultimately a pretty good season last season when it's all said and done. But he's the only lefty here, going out there on either side. Sorry, besides Heaney on the other side of the ball. So overall thoughts on Ryan Weathers as the apparent number 2 in this rotation, being the actual breakout that I think a lot of people are talking about. And then, overall, are there any hitters that we can take a look at from both sides of the ball?
I'm in on the Ryan Weathers hype at this price. I mean, if it goes up too much, maybe I'd start pumping the brakes. But we did see a drastic improvement, at least in the results numbers in 2024. Got that ERA under 4. It had never been under 5 in the past. Uh, um, and the X stats are down there. Not great, but down around 4, right? A FIP 4.11, xERA 4.20. That's getting down to where you start diving and looking. And I'm not going to try to butcher some of these numbers, but like I say all the time, listening to people that I know are much more smarting about pitcher than me, Nick Pollock, Eno Saris, Paul Sporer, Bubba and Bloom, both all seem to be in on Ryan Weathers. So yeah, I'm interested here. That, and you know, I think in general, over the past several seasons, all of us at Fantasy Players were interested in any Miami Marlins pitcher.
Fair.
And due to injury and underperformance by some, we've kind of shied away from that. But, Edward Cabrera is still 26 years old. He will be 27 soon. Max Meyer, 3 years ago, this guy was being drafted 150 picks ahead of where he's being drafted now, and he had never thrown a pitch in professional baseball, right? So I mean, these are definitely guys to keep an eye on, not guys I'm running out and I have to have them, but definitely be watching all of these Miami Marlin pitchers that aren't being drafted.
Yeah, it's always fun to see a narrative shift, over the course of a long period of time too. Not even just like one season or another, but like
you said, one guy inside the top 300 a couple of years ago, whether they had any experience or not, they'd all been inside the top 200, right?
That's true. Fair enough. It's like you completely get blinded by the fact that it's not a good team and the wins are going to be hard to come by, but because they had so much success bringing up all these players that they are going to find a way. And now it's just almost like the shine is gone. And you can kind of see through and then really take advantage or really look at what opportunity actually sits in front of you. All right, so we'll move on to the Philadelphia Phillies. They face off against the Washington Nationals in Washington, where Washington will be throwing out Mackenzie Gore to start us off. And then they followed by a righty-lefty split of Irvin and Parker, whereas the Phillies should be throwing out Zach Wheeler to start it off, followed by Sanchez and Nola, also splitting the lefty-righty split. How these guys line up is really doesn't really matter as far as lefty or righty, but knowing that most likely we're going to see a split over the weekend, and we'll only have the two
exactly
for this team so that they have the Friday off today. The name I brought up earlier that I found interesting from the Washington side, it's kind of player that can have value whether or not he's starting or not, is Nasim Nunez, who is, as I mentioned, has the 7 stolen bases out of 8 attempts in spring training, leading spring training in that category. He's also a Rule 5 pick. So, he's probably, he's having some success in spring training. He hasn't kicked himself off the roster in that regard. So if he's on the roster, he's going to be, he's going to be on the roster. He's going to be playing. And again, he's the type of player that he doesn't have a starting role per se, but you're getting him 4 stolen bases. You can take advantage of that over this weekend, regardless of what the handedness of the pitchers are on the mound to start the game. So that's one name that kind of stood out to me. The other one in the Philadelphia side was Edmundo Sosa, just because he's got so much eligibility and he's looking to add some outfield reps in spring training, and he could become a center field option for the Phillies as a backup to Rojas out there. It's pretty much Rojas' only real center field option that they have. Sosa really hasn't played center field ever. But if he can, not make a fool of himself out there, he could gain that 4th eligibility moving throughout the course of the season. So always going to be hard to really focus on any of these players for this kind of an opening day weekend where they only have 2 games and they're splitting the handedness. So unless it's one of your all-stars that's going to play no matter what, of course, you're probably considering getting some coverage for them. But anything else stand out for you with these matchups?
Nope, you nailed it. For either of these teams, the 2 names that I put, both for Philadelphia versus Washington, that's due to facing the lefty on Thursday, because one lefty, one righty over the weekend, like you said, you're even considering sitting superstars if you have coverage for that.
Mm-hmm.
But Sosa, who you mentioned, and Rojas, who you also mentioned, is the only 2 players from either of these teams that I jotted down this could affect very much.
Mm-hmm.
At least that I would have interest in.
Yeah, especially for this opening day weekend. All right, now the fun one, the Cubs face off against, of course, the Dodgers in Tokyo for those 2 games. But for opening day weekend, they're playing Arizona in Arizona. Shout out to my coworker, Andrew, who will be at probably that Thursday game. It's just one of those fun little situations where he gets to go down to Arizona for spring training and get to see a spring training game and then an opening day game in the same 2 or 3 day stretch. So hopefully he does get to see Corbin Burns for Arizona. I know he was a big signing, but did they announce an opening day starter as Arizona?
My knowledge, that has not been announced. That
I kind of assume it's going to be Gallen just because he's been there. He's the kind of a semi face of that franchise at this point. but I would understand. It really doesn't matter for the purposes of what we're talking about. It's going to be either Gallen or Burns. They're both righties. So for the splits conversation, it doesn't really make a big difference. Then we have Kelly and Rodriguez, the sole lefty that they'll probably throw out at some point over the weekend for Arizona. And the Cubs throwing out, who knows?
Right. Same
But
situation as the Dodgers.
yeah.
Right. So we don't know if they'll reset. It's 9 days, but there's travel. There's a couple more spring training games that I would typically, well, I started to assume that they would just reset. Well, then I realized with the travel and and maybe these guys need to pitch. You know, Emoniga is going to pitch on Tuesday. His 6 days off means he would pitch the following Monday, which means he's not available on stateside opening night,
Right.
right? Maybe, or they just let him throw a bullpen in there and then he's out there again on Thursday. It's 9 days, so he could do it. But I don't know how they will handle that. But yeah, it's just the Cubs side of this. The Cubs even have an extra game than the Dodgers, right? So that's why I'm it's even a bonus, an extra bonus. I'm trying to find Cubs that might get in there. And the two biggest ones for me are John Birdie and Vidal Brujan. One or the other is going to be in there all in each of those 6 games.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes maybe both of them. And for other teams that over the 4-day opening weekend, we're at most getting 3 games from, we're getting up to 6 from these guys. And we'll know about 2 of those games before we have to make that decision. So yeah, I'm just so big on these Cubs backups, especially either Bertie or Brujan. I did have the choice in a draft and I chose Bertie. That may just because that's who Jason has listed on roster resource, but I kind of think that he is the guy that will get a little more playing time than Brujan.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Brujan has the luxury of showing that he went 4 for 4 on the base pass in spring training so far. And of course, both these guys, you're going to know what they did in Japan before you have to make this decision. Anyway, there's always fab Kevin. If you made the wrong decision, you can always, I'm sure you can fab Brujan. I'm sure he's still available in that league.
Oh, after that weekend, I don't want either one of them.
Well, you'll want him if he did something in Japan.
Gotcha. That
remember,
very first fab.
We're going to be able to fab all the Japan players if they weren't drafted. Yeah. After we know what they're doing. Hence the free look. Cool. Yeah. Brujan being one of the guys that I had on my list as well for that exact reason. All right. Cincinnati, we mentioned they're playing against San Francisco, where San Francisco should be throwing out a pair of righties and a lefty, but that righty-lefty split should come over the weekend. Logan Webb starting us off, Justin Verlander and Robbie Ray probably being the 2-3 there. And excuse me. And then Cincinnati should be throwing out Hunter Green and then Brady Singer and Nick Lodolo. Again, also splitting the righty-lefty split over the weekend. Granted, it's in Cincinnati, but
it's 2 teams that play matchups, so there's not going to be players that are available. Now, if you haven't drafted yet, you're drafting the superstars from these teams. Sure, you're probably
not worried about it
playing them because they're probably starting both games. You're getting 2 out of 3, but as many matchups as both of these teams play, they're bench players that we would be looking at and looking for a matchup. They're all out of play with one lefty, one righty in what for other teams is a 3-game weekend.
Robbie Ray has not thrown a walk all spring training. That's amazing. Walks are that stat
that is amazing.
That's one of the stats that you can look at in spring training and actually, maybe hold your hat on a little bit is walk rate, or at least walks in general.
My problem with Robbie Ray over the years was where he was drafted too.
Sure.
I did draft Robbie Ray last season in my main event, knowing he was being dropped. It was my last round pick. But where you can get him now. Yeah, I have interest. I just didn't like him when he was like a 3-4 turn guy.
Fair, fair. I liked it better when I could pick him post 200 as well.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
all right, we're getting down to the final bits here. Let's see. We head up. I think that might. I
We
think we
might have got them
we
all.
got them all. I gotta ask
Yeah.
you the one name that you didn't put on here that you're probably getting mad at me for even mentioning it because I saw you mention it in the Discord. Tampa Bay looks like they are stretching out Joe Boyle as being a starter through a lot of pitchers in his last outing and looked pretty good doing it. Do you think he gets in that opening weekend, even as like a large, like, because Tampa Bay will do this regardless, a bullpen day in general, or do you think we don't see him until the first full week of the season?
I don't think we see him that opening weekend. McClanahan, Bradley, Pepio, that's pretty good. Zach Littell had a injury concern, I believe, a couple of days ago, but I think Roster Resource still has him in there. And then Shane Boz, Drew Rasmussen, both making their way back from injuries as well. We talked about Joe Boyle early in the offseason. I think I talked about how Eno Saris and Trevor May were both just really talking him up if he can ever get any type of command. So when he gets traded to Tampa Bay, that's a plus in my
Sure.
mind. And then now, what we've seen from him in spring training, and I talked about Dustin May earlier, what Joe Boyle has done this spring looks as nasty or even nastier than Dustin May.
Hmm.
If he if Tampa can teach him some command, this is a guy that is an absolute steal. He's one of those guys that there's a 5% chance, but he's one of these guys we can draft way, way late that could be like an SP1 or 2 by the end of the year.
Right. That's the kind of things
He
he's
has the
showing us.
stuff. He needs command.
Yeah, yeah. Simple as that. It's just that simple.
It's that easy.
Just find it. Just find it somewhere. Um,
But it's on the right track with Tampa so far from what we've seen. That's what's great.
yep. Another name, the last name I'll throw out here that kind of stood out to me. I don't think he'll end up making the opening day roster, but he hasn't been sent down yet. He's having a great spring. Is prospect Robert Hassel III over in Washington, trying to fight his way into the outfield to join that young crew that's building itself back up. Thoughts on stashing a guy like Hassel, who, even if he doesn't start in the season because of the spring that he's having, could surprise us. They could surprise us and just get him into the opening day roster. And even if he doesn't, do you think he just comes up early in the season based on how well he did in the spring?
Yeah, I think that's what we see. And this has me a little worried. I've talked a lot this offseason about how confident I am that Jacob Young will have an everyday playing spot all season. But if James Wood and Dylan Cruz hit the ground running and are having good years and Hassel forces his way in, then that's Jacob Young's spot that he'd be taking. So I am a little worried there. I don't see all of that coming to fruition. Cruz and Wood both playing exceptionally. All four of them, including Young and Hassel, all four of them staying completely healthy. That's a lot to go right for Hassel, but he is 100% worth keeping an eye on. I do not think he breaks camp with the major league roster.
Yeah, I mean, not that a lot of us talk about this, but we don't actually have this much flexibility in our drafts. But he's the type of guy that you draft and then you drop after the
Mhm.
first bad period, just so he is available early if you're watching him and nobody else is, type of thing. And maybe
Right.
you can get him a week early, but that's easier said than done. Just because there's so many things that you need to be doing during your drafts, and only so many little wasted draft picks you can actually make, especially in a league where you don't have IL spots or you don't have a very deep bench. So something more to keep in mind. Kevin, This was a lot of fun. It was nice to get our last non-fab episode just at the 2-hour mark. Where how leave us up as you planned your trip to Vegas. Funnily enough, I will be also going to Vegas, and we will be ships in the night. But I'm going for different reasons this year. What can you leave us with as you head into your main event and your other drafts?
Yeah, I just want to drive home everything we've talked about this entire episode. Sounds really nitpicky. We're talking about drafting guys to play them for one night, and then we'll drop them and pick somebody else up. And then this opening weekend, there are more 2-game series than any other weekend of the series. So throughout the rest of the season, there's not as much to look at as there is this opening weekend when we're doing this. But if we keep up on this, right? Just that Thursday night, one night, a guy in your lineup. If two or three, if you have 2 or 3 Tampa or Colorado players, or guys on the wrong side of a platoon, especially the teams that are going to throw a lefty out there on opening night, you might be losing at bats opening night of the season, right? And if you 2 or 3 spots, that's 10 at bats. Over the weekend, you can save 10 more by playing platoon matchups, right? There are over 50 lineup days in an NFBC season because we split them in half, right? 27 weeks, but we lose 2 half weeks. We have 52 hitter scoring periods. That's over 500 at bats. If you right, we talk about this a lot. How much do you want to pay attention to your team? How much work are you willing to put in toward the maintenance and taking that into account when you draft players? Well, regardless of how you draft players, if you're willing to do that on a weekly basis, and it takes planning ahead because you can't just wait and do it when you're setting your lineup, you don't have the players to do it. You have to plan ahead and fab for it as well. You get an entire extra player worth of at bats by the end of the season if you're willing to do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key phrase.
And
right
I
there.
already have an extra player because I'm drafting
Now,
2
those
top catchers. So now I'm looking at 1,000 at bats more than my opponents if I'm willing to do this and they're not. That's what I'm getting at here for anybody that, because it's easy. It's opening weekend. I don't have to worry about it. It's
We
half
make
a
up
week.
for it.
I'm not worrying about it this weekend. But then you start saying things like that all year long. You got Memorial Day weekend, 4th of July, right? We talk about it on all the holidays. You have other things that come up in your own life. You end up, even if you are, because I'm speaking from experience, most weeks I'm good about it. But if there's weeks here and there, you start throwing things away, it only takes 4 or 5 times, and you've probably given up 100 at bats.
Not to mention that the beginning of the season is when everybody's paying attention. Everybody's putting in the work, the extra work. It's the second
so
half.
Don't blow off the opening weekend.
Yeah, everybody's paying attention. So if you're not, and then
right.
You have to, hopefully you're still paying attention in August and September, and you can make up for it. But why put yourself behind the 8 ball? Just do the work now. If you're going to put the work in August, put the extra work up in April as well. Kevin, that was awesome. Thank you so much. But
that was fun. I knew it was going to be a long one, but it was fun.
And there were names on this list we didn't even get to.
We skipped some stuff. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll talk about them next week as we talk about who we are.
Yeah, next week. Basically, this was a precursor for next week because now we've talked about this. We can say, we told you last week, this is why we're picking this guy up this weekend. Right?
So it'll be a short episode is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Go see the last
we think that now.
Yeah. All right. Well, after all that and everything else, that is going to do it for episode 205 of On the Wire. I am Adam Howe on behalf of Kevin Hastings. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.